How are all of you lovely people doing today? My name is John, and welcome to another fantastic episode of the Zombie Storyline Q&A. This is a series where I take your questions about the zombie storyline and I answer them. Whether it's a big, a small, or a simple question, I'm always happy to take them on. You can either leave your questions down below or tweet me at JohnnyJ25 with your questions. Either way, you may be in the next episode. Without further ado, let's begin. We're going to kick off today's episode with a question from Nixaru on Twitter, who asks, Johnny, who came first, Monty or the Shadowman? I picked this question not because I thought it would be fun to discuss whether Dr. Monty or the Shadowman came first. Truthfully, I don't think that's important. I picked this question because I thought it would be productive to talk about the origin of Dr. Monty and the Shadowman. While we have yet to be explicitly told where they come from, I do have a theory based on some evidence in the game. The first bit of evidence comes from this cipher found in Shadows of Evil, the Only the Curse Survives cipher. When solved, you receive the message, the Elders will continue to seed space and time. I must lead them to a place they cannot see. Now this place they cannot see is vague. We've actually yet to really explore this in game all that well. We don't know who wrote this cipher, but what I liked about this cipher is the mention of the Elders. This is the first time we were ever told about a group of beings known as the Elders. In fact, we haven't really gained much more information about the Elders since this cipher. What I'm going to suggest, and my theory is, and this is just a theory, that Dr. Monty and the Shadowman either are the Elders or are two of the Elders. There might be more that we've yet to actually meet. Our characters almost come off as gods, especially Dr. Monty. Dr. Monty has talked about free will. He's talked about the beginning of the universe. He said, in the beginning, and trust me, there's a beginning. So for a character to have really existed since the beginning of time, for a character to have claimed to have created free will, he must almost be like a god. This is where the idea that maybe Dr. Monty is an elder. But what about the Shadowman? Well, the Shadowman and Dr. Monty were once colleagues, as we learn from this Dr. Monty quote.
Now here's the thing. I knew a bloke, and I'm talking way back. He was the sweetest, most charming individual you could ever wish to meet. He was funny too. We used to have such a good old laugh together. Honestly, my sides hurt thinking about it. He was my friend. He was my best friend. And then the Apothecons got hold of him. Since then, he's pretty much acted as their agent, zipping around the galaxy. Wait, I keep changing it, don't I? Which do you prefer, universe, multiverse, omni-fucking-verse? Oh, it doesn't really fucking matter, does it? Yeah, let's get on with it. Short version is, he's no longer sweet, charming, or funny. He's what brought them here when he escaped the key.
Dr. Monty explains that they were quite good friends and they were close for a very long time, but unfortunately, the Shadowman fell under the influence of the Apothecons. He was tainted, and then he was no longer the good, charming fellow best friend of Dr. Monty that Monty once knew. Now he was the original harbinger of evil, and because they were both once really close friends and almost colleagues, this leads me to think that the Shadowman was also one of the Elders. So this is what I think Dr. Monty and the Shadowman are, and I almost view them as like these godlike creatures who have been there since the beginning. They were the ones who kind of helped create the universe. Together, they put everything in place, and Monty created free will, and maybe the Shadowman had done other things. And we can discuss where the Elders came from, but then you get into a chicken and the egg argument. It's like asking, where did God come from? It's a question that is impossible to answer, but what we can do is look at these characters and go, well, if they are the Elders, and they are the ones who seeded space and time and created all of these things around us, then they must have been here since the beginning. And who really came first, Monty or the Shadowman? Neither. They have existed since the beginning, and sure, originally they were both good, and then the Shadowman was eventually turned evil, so I guess you could say the Shadowman comes after Dr. Monty, but they both existed as people, probably around the same time. Moving on, we now have a question from Peter Stanley who asks, why didn't the Shadowman steal the summoning key and do everything that takes place in Revelations in Shadows of Evil? The Shadowman basically does do what he does in Revelations as he does in Shadows of Evil. They're no different in terms of events. The Apothicons, as Dr. Monty has explained, are parasitic creatures. They travel from universe to universe trying to consume all of the energy in that universe until it basically ceases to exist. And then what they do with that energy is use it to, one, continue living, and also store it in the Apothicon sun. That's what they do. So what they're doing in Revelations is no different than what they tried to do in Shadows of Evil. The Shadowman, though, in terms of stealing the summoning key, always seems to be trying to get his hands on the summoning key. When he manipulates Dr. Maxis into freeing him from the summoning key, he almost does a very similar thing in Shadows of Evil through the Reporter. Not many people actually know about the Reporter in Shadows of Evil. He was there. He enters Morgue City under the request of a person known as Mr. Rapt. Now, as we'll later learn, Mr. Rapt was actually the Shadowman, and he had him go get the summoning key. We learn about this process in a cipher written by Richtofen. When solved, the cipher reads, I met the reporter who was to deliver the artifact. He said he was going to bring it in his truck in a crate, but when I arrived, the reporter was babbling and acting wildly, waving the letter in his hand, telling me to stay away. The crate containing the artifact had been sealed with some ancient magic. When I told him I must have the artifact and moved towards the crate, he attacked me. I acted in self-defense, stabbing him in the chest. This was written by Richtofen, we believe, and what we learn in Revelations is that the Shadowman had considered the reporter a friend, and Richtofen had done everything he told him to. So what most likely happened was the Shadowman told the reporter to go and locate the summoning key, and then he wanted Richtofen to use the summoning key, so then he had Richtofen go retrieve it. But things don't always go exactly as planned, and Richtofen ends up stabbing the reporter. Now, we know for a fact that the Shadowman had been having the reporter go collect a bunch of artifacts from a radio within Shadows of Evil.
Hey, Mr. Rapt. So I tracked down all the people you asked me to look into. I sent you a telegram with all their details, all their contact numbers. It's not that I'm ungrateful. I know the checks you've given me have been more than generous for services rendered. It's just all this stuff you've had me do. Tracking down ancient artifacts in the South Pacific, finding all these strange metals and rocks in Russia. And still, I haven't even met you face to face. I'm sorry, Mr. Rapt. I think maybe the mood in the city is getting to me a little. Making me nervous. Antsy. Anyway, I'm looking forward to you finally getting here.
The reporter doesn't know that he's working for the Shadowman. He's just trying to collect a paycheck. He's working for some mysterious Mr. Rapt. However, we know that Mr. Rapt is actually the Shadowman. And this is because the Shadowman said that he had a reporter friend who Richtofen stabbed, so hopefully you can see where all of these pieces are coming together. The reporter probably, and this is what I theorize, was there for a few reasons. One, to try to track down the summoning key, and two, to take notes on some people within the city. Some of the people in the city I believe he was taking notes on were our four characters who we played as in Shadows of Evil. And when things didn't go as planned and Richtofen ended up stabbing the reporter, he needed a new way to get his hands on the summoning key. And this is when he takes our four characters and brings them into the realm of Shadows of Evil and tries to manipulate them into collecting the summoning key and spawning the other Apothicons to then consume that universe. That's what I believe is happening in this instance, and you can see that the Shadowman is doing the same exact thing he did in Revelations. He's manipulating people in an effort to, one, summon the Apothicons, and two, use the summoning key. That's what I believe is going on. Today's episode will end with a question from Toby Wood, who asks, Johnny, how do you think the miscellaneous radios tie into Revelations, McNamara, Sarah Michelle Gellar, etc.? This is Treyarch's way of tying up loose ends. Within the zombie storyline, we have a lot of loose ends, especially whenever Treyarch introduces new characters, because they don't really treat them well. What happens is, we get a group of characters. For example, the characters within 5. We have the President, a future President, the Dictator of Cuba, and the Secretary of Defense, all within the Pentagon as it's being overrun by zombies. Within the game, we just keep on playing until we die. This map doesn't have an Easter egg. This map doesn't have an ending. We never heard back from them since, so we had no idea what was going on to our characters as time moved on. And the radios serve as that explanation, serve as that conclusion to tell us what happens to these characters. As we learn from McNamara's radio, the president and his VIPs are all dead. And McNamara is the last one alive. He's hiding in a closet from all of the other zombies, and what probably happens to him is that he dies as well. He's most likely not going to escape. He's the last survivor, and I'm sure as soon as he opens up that closet door, there's a horde of zombies. They all probably end up dying because after a while, you just get tired, you get sloppy, you start making mistakes and you succumb to the zombies, or you run out of ammunition. You just aren't going to be able to shoot the zombies forever. You got to keep the game grounded, so unfortunately the characters die. What we had assumed though was that history, because our history includes the characters being alive, moves on, and somehow they manage to escape, and President Kennedy does not die in the Pentagon. He eventually gets assassinated, but in the world of zombies, in that universe, President Kennedy is not assassinated. Instead, he dies in the Pentagon because of the zombies. That's what's going on in this situation. Now, we see the same thing happen with other characters. For example, Johnny Banana, who was a part of the original Verrückt mission. Most of his crew died, and then he was the last survivor. He leaves a few dying radios, and he eventually will most likely succumb to the zombies. We can see him start to slowly go insane, and he's not going to last forever. He's most likely going to have the same fate as the rest of his crew. That's what's going on with these characters. Treyarch is telling us that, unfortunately, they all die. And the same thing almost happens with the Call of the Dead crew. It's a little bit more interesting. Most of them die. As Sarah Michelle Gellar says, the entire cast and crew went missing. However, she manages to survive, and she tries to do more research. She wants to figure out what's going on, and as she's doing this research, she accidentally teleports to Shangri-La. Now, when she teleports to Shangri-La, she's stuck in an infinite cycle, the same exact one that Brock and Gary were stuck in. She says she just feels like she's just repeating everything, and she also feels like she keeps dying and things are endless, and that's because she really is in an endless cycle. Now, she also can interact with Brock and Gary. She's able to kill them, but that doesn't matter as much because they're also stuck in an infinite cycle too, and every time they die, they just repeat the cycle. Now, a theory that people have suggested is that maybe when Sarah Michelle Gellar actually goes to Shangri-La, she's the one that triggers the cycle. She's the one that gets Brock and Gary to become stuck in the loop. And then this actually ends up helping our characters when they are working through the Easter egg, because it was by freeing Brock and Gary, or at least letting them die, that they were actually able to complete their own mission and collect the focusing stone. So maybe, in a very indirect way, Sarah Michelle Gellar actually traps Brock and Gary in the cycle, which then goes on to help our characters when they enter Shangri-La. That's just a theory, though. That's going to wrap things up for this episode of the Zombie Storyline Q&A. If you enjoyed the video, maybe give it a like, possibly subscribe for more. I'm always doing things like this covering the zombie storyline, so if you enjoyed this video, I'll sure you're enjoying the next one. Have a great day, and bye.